Well, we've been talking about the war on lobsters and the war on American businesses, and tonight we dig into the hypocrisy behind the Biden administration's focus on destroying lobstering and further other industries while green lighting offshore wind. Join me now, Executive Director of Long Island Commercial Fishing Association, Bonnie Brady. Bonnie, tell us a little bit about, we've been talking about how it's destroying a specific industry, a lobster industry in Maine, but it spreads throughout the coast to all fishing, does it not? This environmental handshake with the Biden administration shutting down homegrown American industries. About right?
Well, yes, thank you for having me. The issue is really the endangered North Atlantic right whale. And according to the take reduction team, they decided they had to have a 98% reduction of lines in the water. That's based upon their determining that there are less than 350 North Atlantic right whales right now. And so it is obviously lobstermen are being dramatically affected. I was up in Stonington about 2 months ago and spoke to many of them. We have lobstermen also on Long Island, lobstermen, Jonah crab fishermen, pot fishermen, and gillnet fishermen, and they're all going to be affected by this mandate that was initially supposed to take 10 years, and then environmental groups sued, and as a result, the judge ruled in their favor. And initially, it was going to have to happen even quicker. And I believe last week they offered a 2-year extension to determine what could be done. But the things that they're using as the possibilities, things like ropeless gear, they don't even have the technology for it to work. And meanwhile, there are questions regarding how the biological pinion was used, et cetera, regarding cryptic mortality. Meanwhile, there hasn't been a lobster entanglement that has been proven since 2004 in the US. So it's really an extremely difficult situation. And the onus is being put upon the fishermen.
In essence, the government's telling these lobster men and women to cut back 98% of the only access they have, the only means of pulling lobster out of the ground, cut back 98% within 2 years, maybe a moratorium for a couple of years more. Meanwhile, there's no alternative. And then additionally, talk to us a little bit about this whole idea of putting wind turbines into the ocean, which may be even more detrimental to the sea life than lobster fishermen's lines. Go ahead.
Right, exactly. There's been one entanglement since 2004. However, they're going to take that same grounds, and within the North Atlantic, in the East Coast, they want to put over 5,000 wind turbines pile driven into the ocean floor in the areas in which the North Atlantic right whale migrates. Kind of doesn't seem to quite fit with the other scenario they're given. And we've been fighting this since. In Long Island, we've been fighting offshore wind since 2003. This most recent onslaught began pretty much with the Biden administration deciding they wanted to go to 30 gigawatts by, I believe, 2030. And it doesn't seem to be abating.
So what does that entail? How do you get 30 gigawatts of power out of the ocean? How many turbines do you need for that?
Well, if you're following apparently the administration's plan, first you put the wind energy areas that you choose to lease, you put them everywhere the commercial fishermen fish offshore. Then you lease the areas to foreign government-owned energy companies. We've got Ørsted, which is 51% owned by the Danish government. We have Statoil, which changed their name to Equinor. That's 67% owned by the Norwegian government. And basically, let's put it this way, 40 years ago, the Magnuson-Stevens Act was enacted to push the foreign fishing fleets off of our shores and create something called the exclusive economic zone from 3 to 200 miles offshore to grow the domestic commercial fishing fleet. Here we are 40 years later, and foreign governments are being allowed to lease our EEZ and basically push American fishermen off of our grounds. Right.
Unbelievable.
Right.
Bonnie Brady, always good having you on. Let's get you back again. This is a story that keeps on growing. I don't think the folks really realized that we're actually leasing our fishermen's ability to pull lobsters and other fish out of the sea for us to consume, and leasing that space, that sea, to foreign governments. Statoil, I know Statoil very well, the Norwegian oil companies. Thank you very much, Bonnie Brady.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, now let's bring in editor-in-chief of the Maine Wire, Steve Robinson. Steve, you hear this discussion we've been having over the last couple of days. We're concerned about the fishermen in Maine, but we're also concerned that if you pull these these lobsters out of the fishermen's boats and pods, you're going to end up just turning to China and Canada for the same lobsters. About right?
Well, I think that's exactly right. It's a rule that's going to harm American businesses while really boosting foreign businesses. It's really difficult to understand here because this is one of those rare instances where politicians on both sides of the aisle in Maine, from our Governor Janet Mills to our independent so-called Senator Angus King, Republican Susan Collins, across the board, they've all been talking with their connections in the federal government, saying that this is not based in science. This is something that is really a solution in search of a problem, and something needs to be done to prevent this from harming American businessmen. But for some reason, the federal government has proven remarkably stubborn. And I think, as Bonnie just laid out there, you kind of have to follow the money here and question whether the war on the Maine lobster has something to do with the push from the Biden administration for these offshore wind factories.
Well, and others, they may be actually responding to these environmental groups' donations into political coffers of the Democrats. I'm thinking of the spotted owl. When Bill Clinton was president, he shut down the logging industry in the Northwest, worrying about an endangered owl that ended up not being endangered, causing wildfire hazards all over the place. Delta smelt in California, remember that? Farmers had to stop farming because they were diverting some water for a 2-inch smelt that wasn't even endangered. That West Texas lizard stopped drilling in Texas for a while. It goes on. And now right whales, which I understand, aren't that endangered.
So, yeah, I mean, they are endangered, but the problem is they're not endangered because of Maine lobster gear.
Right.
Yeah, Maine lobster gear has nothing whatsoever to do with the entanglements of these whales. So you're not going to find anyone in the state of Maine who says that it's not important to protect the endangered right whale. They're just not saying that. What they're saying is actually do something that's going to prevent right whales from dying, like maybe reconsider this huge offshore wind plan that's going to disturb their breeding grounds and areas where they feed. I think you saw the Bloomberg report just a week ago where someone had to actually file a Freedom of Information Act request to get internal communications where NOAA scientists in a federal agency were saying this wind power is going to be a problem for the right whale. They're not saying that publicly. What they're doing publicly is coming after the Maine lobster. Privately, they're talking about the danger that these wind turbines might do. And I have to tell you, Eric, in Maine, the lobstering community is really scratching their heads, wondering why is the federal government so stubborn about this? And one of the possible theories they've come up with is that Monica Medina, the wife of White House Chief of Staff Ron Klain, is a longtime Save the Whales activist. She worked for Pew Charitable Trusts specifically on whale-related issues, and now she's a high-level undersecretary at the State Department where she focuses on environmental issues. So, people on the working waterfront in Maine are wondering if there's a little bit of informal lobbying going on in the White House that is causing, the most powerful man in the country to side against the Maine lobster industry and in favor of Canadian and Chinese alternatives. And you mentioned the money, the donations. I think you also have to consider that there are two outside nonprofits, two radical environmentalist groups, the Seafood Watch, which is part of the Monterey Bay Aquarium, and the Marine Stewardship Council, which is based in London. Both of these organizations have come out and given a red warning, so-called, to the Maine lobster. I think you have to question who is giving money to those organizations, because it's public that the Canadian government has supported the Marine Stewardship Council. Some lawmakers, Republicans in the state of Maine, have called for the Attorney General in the state to investigate whether those donations have played a role in the delisting of the lobster.
Always follow the money. That's always the case. You follow the money and it leads right back to the Canadians pushing for the Maine lobster industry to shut down, because what does that mean? You got to go to Canada for your lobster, and they're unbelievable. And again, the Biden administration, the Democrats, just playing right into their hand. Quick thought.
Oh, well, you talk about following the money. They're going to be following the money right out of the state if this gets if these rules pass, right? Because you're looking at a $1.5 billion a year industry. This will really devastate the Maine coast. And you have to also consider that in a lot of these areas, these are island communities. These are rural communities. These aren't people who can just turn around and go get a job working at Twitter or some tech company. This is going to devastate the coastal communities, and the consequences will be far-reaching.
And we asked yesterday, why does the state of Maine continually to vote Democrat in presidential elections the last 8 in a row? In fact, Steve Robinson, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks, Eric. Appreciate it.
All right, coming up, we told you actor and author Kirk Cameron was denied Story Hour by public libraries for his new faith-based kids book. Well, now he's planning to take legal action. He joins us for an exclusive interview next.